What is up, y'all? It's me, Dan, moderately anonymous MDG. How are we doing today? Welcome back to the show. Today we're doing something a little bit different from what we normally do, but this is a topic that I've seen up a ton of times and something that I have a lot of opinions about, so I really wanted to talk about it. This past weekend, friends of the show, the Bufftown Bullies, put on a cEDH tournament. I believe that there were 32 entrants, and the winner of this tournament is a deck that no one has ever seen before. Maybe I'm sure that someone is going to get in the comments and say, yes, I've seen this before, but not very widely seen at least. The winner of this tournament was Liberator Urza's Battlethopter. It has got a ton of unique cards in it. It is a very unique deck. It's probably not something like you've ever really seen before, and I think that is a big part of the reason why it might have won this tourney. Now, first of all, I'm not taking anything away from the pilot here. I believe that the pilot's name is Derek. So first of all, before I say anything, big shouts to Derek for an awesome win. This is not an easy thing to do to top any cEDH tournament. There is so much randomness in every single aspect of it. And even though it was only 32 players, that is still a ton of players to get on top of. Big shouts for the win. It's very, very cool. But inevitably, when a deck that is like this, and when I say a deck that is like this, I mean a deck that is unique and a deck that we haven't really seen put up results before, a big part of the discussion in the online sphere is this going to be the new big king on the block? And another secondary argument that I see a lot is that these sort of wins prove that decks like Blue Farm or Roxai aren't the best decks, and that you can go into any tournament playing whatever deck you want, and as long as you know it well enough, you're going to get on top and you're going to get that win. And while I think that there is a certain amount of truth to both of those arguments, I think that people really try to build up the underdog nature of these decks and put it on this sort of pedestal that is going to be a lot higher than I think that a lot of these decks are going to be able to show over a long period of time. And so what I mean specifically by proving its worth over a long period of time, I mean, I want to look at something like, this is the EDH Top 16. This is Eminence Gaming's own record of the best decks that have been registered in their events. If we look at some of the top decks, we look at Crom, Ludovic's Opus, and Tymna the Weaver. We've got 26 top 16s, 139 entries, and almost a 19% conversion rate. So this is what I mean. Crom and Tymna is the best deck because it's able to prove itself over a long period of time. 139 entries, almost 20% across a bunch of different pilots and a lot of different tournaments. And the same thing if we look at some of the other top lists here. Najila, 16 top 16s, 79 entries, 20% conversion rate. Bruce Tarl, Thrasios, 14 top 16s, 60 entries, 23% conversion rate. These are doing a lot of numbers over a long period of time. Now, of course, even 139 entries for Tymna Crom, even though there's the most entries of any of these lists, it is still a very small sample size. And I think that some of the data on this list is a little bit skewed. Like if we go further down, do I believe that Atraxa Grand Unifier is one of the best, is the 16th best deck in cEDH right now? No, I certainly do not. But again, we're looking at a small sample size. And when you look at a small sample size, i.e. one tournament, you might be able to think that, wow, this Atraxa deck is really great because it did well in this small sample size. But the question is not, can it do well in a small sample size? Can anything do well in a small sample size? Definitely. cEDH is a very random format. You're going to run into a lot of different kinds of pilots and a lot of different kinds of decks. And also, there's a lot of different ways that you can attack the meta with a deck that people don't understand. The Brewer's advantage is this thing that I really want to hinge a lot of this conversation on, but we'll get a little bit deeper into that a little bit later on. But what I want to say is that when you have this small sample size, it's very easy to look at a deck like this and say, well, this won, so this must be great. But something being great is not whether it can win a single tournament. Is Liberator going to be great is a question that's going to be answered by, are we going to continue to see it in top 16s? Are we going to continue to see people register it in cEDH events? Are we going to continue to see people iterate on it and innovate with it? And personally, I think the answer might be no, but let's dive a little bit deeper into what I'm talking about. So first of all, before we do anything else, I think that we should probably just take a look at this deck, see what it has to offer, because like I said, there's a lot of unique pieces, and I think to understand how this deck won, we need to look at this deck and understand how it works. So Liberator itself is a flash flying creature. It is a Thopter. It says you may cast colorless spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. So we can already see our colorless planeswalkers right off to the side here. We've obviously got a ton of other colorless things in the deck as well, because obviously we can run no colors. So basically, our whole deck has flash. That's pretty cool, pretty neat, a very unique effect. The other line of text says whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast that spell is greater than Liberator versus Battlethopter's power, put a +1/+1 counter on Liberator. So it's a flash flying threat. It can get in for damage. And you'll see when we go down to the artifact selection, there are some ways to beef it up as well. So basically, we've got our selection of these colorless planeswalkers. They're all really good at controlling the board. Karn the Great Creator, both of the Ugins, Karn Living Legacy. And the same story is true for pretty much the rest of the deck. If we look at the creature section, we've got things like Emrakul the Promised End, Wandering Archaic, Thought-Knot Seer, Rug of Smothering, which is something that I think people really talked about a lot when Baldur's Gate came out, and people don't really see a lot, but perfect for a deck like this that really needs a high density of colorless spells and wants them to probably be stacks pieces. In that same vein, we've also got like really classics like Lodestone Golem, Soulless Jailer, Silent Arbiter. Like I said, there's no shortage of very unique cards in this deck. But now the probably more unique part of this deck is the fact that if we look at our sorceries, we have Singular 1, it's All is Dust, and our 2 instants are Spatial Contortion and Warping Whale. If you've ever seen our gameplay series, you've definitely heard me threaten the Warping Whale many times with my Ancient Tomb. But then 47 artifacts that we've got in here, and it's a pretty good spread between things like Chalice of the Void and classics like Tanglewire. There's a lot of stacks pieces, a lot of ramp pieces, and then, like I said, some ways to beef up the Battlethopter. We've got a couple of the swords in here and Umezawa's Jite, so we're definitely getting in for some damage as well as locking down the board. Torpor Orb, Trinisphere, we've got a lot of really mean things here. Damping Sphere even. This is like, imagine being able to cast these at instant speed. I can imagine this really like taking over a table. It's a lot of really good pieces. Our land package is pretty normal. We've got some pretty unique pieces again, but again, we were trying to fill out 29 lands in a colorless land deck, so we're gonna have to run some interesting ones. But just the most notable ones are things like Quicksand. You can pop that off and kill an opposition agent or something like that that is stopping you from being able to search through your deck or do whatever it is you need to do. And another one that I've never seen before is Sequestered Stash. This is apparently from one of the Kaladesh blocks. It says 4 mana, tap and sacrifice the stash. Put the top 5 cards of your library into your graveyard, and then you put an artifact card from your graveyard on top of your library. So yeah, a ton of good lands and some less conventional ones, but yeah, you know, we're just filling out the slots here. So the first thing to really talk about is the quality of the cards. I think that's a thing that comes up a lot of times in cEDH deck building is the turn card quality. Now, of course, card quality has a lot to do with context. We are not going to see, obviously, the same kinds of cards in this Battlethopter deck as we're going to see in Tymna Kraum, and that is both okay and necessary. The two decks ask for and want different things to happen in a game. But I think the question is, what are the things that we want and ask for? Tymna Kraum asks to draw cards and to wait until turn 4 or 5 to cast a Grand Abolisher and protect their win, absolutely. This deck is asking to shut the table down, take over the game, and then start beating people to death or overwhelming them with value, which just by the sheer amount of words that I just said, you can tell it is asking for more to happen. But of course, that doesn't answer our question of how does a deck like this win a cEDH tournament? That must mean it's good. And while I don't think that this is a bad deck, I don't think this is top deck material over 139 games. So the first thing that we need to think about is, say you're an opponent, you're sitting down against this Battlethopter deck. This is revealed in the command zone before you start your game. What are your first thoughts? My first thoughts are, obviously I've never seen this before, so any assumptions that I have going into this are just that, purely assumptions. These are things that I think that they might be playing based on the fact that they're colorless. I would generally assume, because Liberator itself doesn't have an ETB, that this is maybe a Torpor Orb deck. It's probably got a lot of other stacks pieces in it. I would very much expect to see some of the like classic vintage prison pieces, something like Phyrexian Revoker, Sphere of Resistance, things like that. But then there's still a lot of other slots and I can't quite know what's going to be in them. So that's the first thing that I really want to point out here, is that every single time that this deck sits down at a table, the other opponents have no idea what to think about what is going to happen. And that is a huge, strict disadvantage. If you are a big fan of pretty much any other format other than cEDH, you are very well aware of something called the Brewer's Advantage. If you've never heard this term before, the Brewer's Advantage is basically taking your own home brew into a very established meta and then taking advantage of that meta because they are not equipped to deal with your very particular problem. Whether this is very intentional and your deck is playing into that space where the meta isn't quite prepared to attack it, or if you just really want to play a bunch of very unique cards and no one can really anticipate what you're going to play next, you're always going to have that advantage of your opponents not knowing what your next move is going to be. You might expect to see the Phyrexian Revoker come down, but are you prepared to fight against that Allus Dust? Maybe not. Whether or not this was an intentional move by the deck builder, this does fit very well into the Brewer's advantage slot, and it also does attack the meta in a very interesting way, because if you look at the rest of the top four, our top four here on screen is Lyndon Swanek, Andre Blanton, Derek, who is our winner, and Riley is our fourth. The decks are Thalia and the Gitrog Monster, Riel the Everwise, and the last is an Okun and Zinder Split deck. So a lot of decks that are honestly also not seen a whole lot. They're kind of on the fringe of the meta, but they all have one thing in common, except for the Thalia and Gitrog deck, is that they're all Dockside Extortionist decks. So they all are not running Null Rod or Collector Oof. And you know who else isn't running Null Rod or Collector Oof? Almost every single popular deck in the meta right now. Going back to our EDH top 16 here, if we look at some of the top decks that are in the meta right now, according to these results, we've got Timnan Crom. Obviously, we're not playing Null Rod there. Najeela the Blade Blossom, also a Dockside Extortionist deck. Also, maybe a Grim Hireling deck, so doubly not turning off those artifacts. Bruce Tarl and Thrasios, a very popular combo inside of the deck, is Dockside Extortionist plus Emil to make infinite mana. Rograk and Silas Wren, obviously a Grixis deck, not playing it. Tivit Cellar Secrets, the biggest collector oof chump of all time. Definitely not playing any Null Rod effects. So you're seeing the pattern here. Do any of these other decks have ways to beat this deck? Yes, of course. If we look at Thalia and the Gitrog Monster, we've actually got some really stone cold silver bullets for it, like Archon of Valor's Reach, that can actually stop you from casting artifacts. And then of course we've also got Collector Oof and the Null Rod in this deck as well. And even though we have the restrictionless tutors in black, we still have to find them and get them on board, which can be a tall order. And again, this is a cEDH tournament. It's very random. There's no guarantee that you're going to be able to get those specific silver bullets out. If you know any cEDH tournament grinders, you hear the stories all the time of, oh, I put the silver bullet in my deck and I played 8 matches across 2 days and I never saw it once. That just happens. That's just variance in a 100-card deck. So we take our deck that is very strong because it is dodging the fact that no one wants to play Null Rod because they all love their Dockside Extortionists, and the fact that we have a deck that no one can really account for, that no one can really know what is going to come out of this. Just that element of surprise is going to win you a non-zero amount of games. Now, I do happen to know that a non-zero amount of this top 4, I think, are personal friends. I think they're all from the New Mexico area. Shout out to Ken Bauman, who I think sent them all out this way over to the Bullies. So even though they might know this deck more intricately, the fact that 30 some odd other people don't know what's in this deck and have never seen it before, that's definitely going to get you through a lot of this. So again, I don't want to take anything away from the pilot here. I am sure that this is a great pilot. I'm sure that these were all great pilots, but I think that there is something to be said that every time a deck that we've never seen wins a tournament, it doesn't mean that this is the new best deck, or that Timnan Crom is irrelevant now, or whatever people want to say on Twitter. I think it's very important to take these with a grain of salt and try to understand what is happening here. Maybe it is that a new paradigm is turning in cEDH and that Liberator Urza's Battlethopter is going to be the next big deck. Sure, I welcome it. Do I expect that to happen? No, I think it's much more likely that this thing that happens all the time happened again. Brewer's advantage and playing into the weaknesses of the meta. But you never know. I love to be proven wrong, so if Liberator is the new meta, bring it on. Ultimately, I think the reason why these arguments come up is that people don't want to believe that there is one singular best deck. And I think that it's partially true that there isn't a singular best deck, because again, we're talking about a format with so much variance in it, but I think the core part of what we're talking about here is consistency, the ability to prove results over time, over many different tournaments. And I hear a lot of people ask the question, what deck should I bring into an event, because they don't necessarily want to bring Timnan Crom because they don't necessarily have fun playing it. EDH ultimately is a format about having fun, and I can understand why people want to play their pet decks in their cEDH tournaments, but you have to think about what your intentions are. Do you want to bring a deck that you're comfortable with playing and that you know well? Yes, of course. You definitely want to bring a deck that you've played many times, that you know all of the lines for, that you understand very well, because your understanding of your deck is going to bring you more success than anything else. But the thing to think about is that there is a limit on how much success that you can really have with any given deck. And I think that ceiling is a lot higher for a deck like Timna Crom than it is for a deck like Liberator. So can you bring a deck like Liberator, bring whatever it is your particular pet deck is into a tournament and win that tournament? Sure. Are you going to be able to do that 20% of the time over 136 entries? Probably not. So again, it all comes back to whatever your intentions are. Do you want to give yourself the best probability that you will win this tournament? Then my advice would be to learn to play the best deck very well. If you look at any other format, that's what players do. You don't see Luis Scott Vargas come to the next standard tournament with his own particular homebrew. He's playing the best deck and he has learned to play that deck well. So is there room for a deck like Liberator in the meta? Yeah, of course, there's room for pretty much any deck in the meta. Again, I think pretty much any deck under the right circumstances with the right pilot can do well. But the question that we want to ask is maybe, do I want to do well with a particular deck one particular time, or do I want to put up results over a period of time? Do I want to take home those titles? Do I want to win those prizes? If you're trying to get prizes, if you've got a lot of money on the line, again, I'm going to suggest learn to play the best deck well. Which is not a thing that everybody wants to hear, but again, it's EDH. It's a choose your own adventure kind of format. Do whatever you want to do. There's always going to be space to perform well and to do well for these kinds of decks. Big shouts to y'all for watching. I hope this was enjoyable and informative. Like I said, this is something I have a lot of opinions about. I feel like it is a sort of under-discussed aspect of cEDH tournaments. But as a huge fan of the cEDH tournament scene, I can't wait to see all of the new things that are going to pop up like this and other decks that people haven't seen before. I think it's a really unique and interesting aspect of the cEDH meta that we do have a lot of decks like these that tend to do well because they can't be accounted for and there's just so much variance in the format. So yeah, big shouts to the pilots, big shouts to everybody involved in running this tournament. It was a very cool one. Shouts to the Bufftown Bullies for putting it on. And I hope y'all enjoyed this little recap. And if you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. And thank you for watching, everybody. Be good to yourselves.